Alright, so you just saw what my U-joint looked like, and what we're going to do is talk about not exactly removing and replacing it. There's a bunch of videos to show you how to do that. It's really more of some of the crap that you run into along the way when you don't own a garage and presses and all these professional tools, and you sort of got to just make it work. So we're going to make it work. Alrighty, doing some work today. We got the drive shaft off of this ridiculous Frontier. Well, last night in the pitch black, we had to work into getting this universal joint. This is actually the second one I put in there. But these caps, somehow this cap sits in here like this, and we had a really hard time getting it out. It was actually jammed in there crooked. One of the reasons for that is whoever used to have this thing let the universal joint get so bad it actually started eating into the wall. So you can see how bad it is. I mean, this thing really needs to be welded and then rebored, but you know, I'm not a machinist, so I'm not even going to attempt that. There is a little bit of material here that it should probably still hold, but what I'm gonna do, I think I'm gonna just put some blue Loctite on there. I don't know if it's gonna work, but you know, we'll see. We'll try to see how long this one will last. Last one, this guy lasted me, I don't know, about 40,000 miles. So, yeah, we're gonna go put the new one in. Okay, well, I had planned on coming down here and showing you the progress and how everything should go together. My neighbor came down here instead, and we banged this thing out in like record time. So thank you, neighbor. You know who you are. Appreciate that as always. If you don't have a neighbor that helps you with projects, you need to stop being antisocial and reach out for some help, because you need that crap when you're working on stuff by yourself. But anyways, so basically, you've probably watched enough videos to know what a U-joint is, pretty much how they go together. It's no different for the Frontiers. These particular ones have 3 of these. I have the SE, it's a 2006 SE with the 4-liter and the 6-speed. So the shafts have 3 of these U-joints and a carrier bearing. Basically, the way you remove everything is there's 4 of these pins, okay? Now, this actually is an aftermarket one, so most of the pins are going to look like this. And you will just use a pair of pliers, squeeze this area here. It's going to pull out at the end of your yoke. So your yoke, you know, obviously is going to sit like this. Then you get another yoke that grabs this side. When you pull the whole shaft out, which is super easy, that's how you'll start removing these U-joints. Now, the reason I said mine was aftermarket is because it had this is the Moog model that had, where's the cap at? All these caps, and I don't have the one I need to show you. Anyways, on the end of it, there's a Zerk fitting where you're able to grease these things. I got it for that purpose, but I thought I was gonna start hearing some squeaking or something to let me know, hey, grease your U-joint. I didn't know it would just completely fail, and anyways, moving on. So yeah, once you pull these guys off, what you're going to want to do is the way this thing sits in the bore of your yoke, you're going to want to basically use a hammer, and I used a socket. I found a socket. I think I was using a 3/4 because I don't use a lot of standard stuff. Everything I use is metric. So this actually will sit on this cap, and it's just smaller than the bore of your drive shaft yoke. So when you pound on this, it's actually going to press this thing out the bottom, and you should be able to remove the bottom cap. And once the bottom cap's off, you flip it over and you just reverse it, you know, bang this out, and then you end up with both your caps out. So it should look like this. One yoke should be off. You should have your U-joint here. It's still attached to the other yoke. You're going to do the same thing. You're going to put something on top. You're going to beat it down, pull this cap off, pull it out the other way. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to focus on was not necessarily installation, removal, and all that. There's a bunch of videos that are super helpful. I really wanted to talk about a couple of the mechanical things that are very simple things that if you don't pay attention to, it will cause you a crap load of problems. Another thing that's really important is when you're doing a job like this is you use the right kind of tools. This sounds like the stupidest thing ever, but a lot of mechanics and working on stuff is doing it the right way, and you don't always have to force stuff or bang it or cut it out, or that's ridiculous. Sometimes you got to do that, but most of the time you don't. So for example, when we're working on this guy here and we're trying to get it pressed out, I used a socket, okay, because this is cheap. I can replace this very easily, and it's smaller than what I'm actually trying, the bore that I'm actually trying to get it through. So it happened to work, but sometimes you might also need something better. Use a softer metal than what you're trying to, than the object you're working with. So obviously a steel drive shaft, you know, we'll use an aluminum dowel like this. This is about an inch dowel. So I'm actually able to hold that in place and then use Mr. BFH to do all the work for me. So that way I'm not destroying it. And this thing, you know, I can mushroom this all day. I got a Dremel, you got a bench grinder. You smooth this thing back down to whatever diameter you need, no problem. Another thing that's really awesome is these guys. These little hammers with the Teflon ends on them. Man, you can go to town all day long with these. You're never gonna destroy any metal with it. So these are good. What I like to do, the second go around that proved way more effective than the first time I tried, is when the first time, what I would actually do is I would take these caps and actually hammer them into the yoke part, and then I would come back and basically take, you know, say this cap is installed in the yoke, I'd come stick this guy in here. Well, that I found that sucked because the needle bearings kept falling out. So what I did this go around is I took one side, put it into the yoke, and I took the U-joint and put it in there with it to keep those bearings from falling out. Now I can hold my the shaft in my hand, and I use this Teflon, you know, this hammer here, and I was able to bang that one side in. Now I can come back with this other cap, and I can slide the U-joint this way as I got this one barely in. And yeah, it's not all the way in, but it's still in enough to keep these bearings from falling out, the needle bearings. And I can tap this side in just enough to where, hey, I've got both sides in, the U-joint's holding it in there, those needle bearings can't fall out. Now I can, you know, really get my socket in there and beat that in. I can even flip it upside down, get all the force this way, and I don't have to worry about these guys falling out, and I'm left with this tiny little gap where those little needle bearings have fallen out, and they're actually keeping me from getting both caps all the way in like they're supposed to be. So remember just a second ago I showed you about how the drive shaft got so bad, or the U-joint, when I had bought the truck, it had started to like wear into the actual yoke itself. And the reason that's a problem is because these things are a press fit. You don't need a press to put them in and out. It just means it's a very close tolerance as far as how much is, you know, this thing, how the size of this compared to the size of the bore. And so when something happens and the bore gets larger, this thing is not going to sit in there like it's supposed to. And even though there's clips in there, it allows for play, and that will wear the thing out. That's a problem with mine. And so how you know you get a bad U-joint is when you pull these caps off, there should be bearings in there. See that? That's a needle bearing. We can, where's my pliers at? You should have a bunch of these little bearings in there like this. Now these things are all lined against the wall of this, all right? And when you get a bad U-joint, you pop it off and dust comes out of this thing, there's no bearings in there. They've all been burned up. Okay, that was the case with both of my U-joints. But one of the things that are really, really, really important is because these things have needle bearings in there, if you're not careful, when you go to put this cap back in that bore and you start hammering it in, these little needle bearings can actually fall, and they'll be sitting there just like that. Now you don't know it. Now when you go to install your other cap, you're going to find is that one side you're going to be able to get your clip on, but the other side, when you come put the cap on that, you can't get the cap down far enough to get your clip. And that's because one of these little needle bearings fell, and it's actually keeping you from closing that gap. So if you're noticing that you bang on this side, you get the clip on, you bang on that side, it doesn't fit. You can come take this clip off, bang this side back down, and install this cap with the clip. But if this side doesn't go down far enough to get both clips on, you probably have one of these in one of these caps. But if they did, what you need to do is not only do you need to get them all lined against, you know, the wall and stood up, but you need to make sure you add some kind of grease. I used a lithium grease, but you really need something thick because you almost got to repack it, okay? And if you run into a problem where you actually break some of the needle bearings, you can reuse one from you know, an old one. Make sure it's in, you know, decent condition. Clean it off. Put some extra grease on there. Everything worked out pretty decent. You can come out here and you'll see when we get up under here that we have the new bearing here. Okay, this is the Moog version. So I do have the ones that have the Zerk fitting, which should be on there. Oh, that's cool. My Zerk fitting fell out, so we're gonna have to go hunt down the old one because I'm gonna need that to grease this thing. But anyways, man, that sucks. Alrighty, we have done startup. I almost ran over my son's bike for the 5th time because they think it's fun to just leave their stuff in front of vehicles. So I run them over. I don't care. I don't hear as much of a roar. The other one I could drive and I would hear some, just like almost like a bad wheel bearing roar, but it was coming from the rear end. And I could take my foot off the gas and let it coast, and it would do it even worse. And that obviously is because the shaft is not spinning on an even plane. It's actually kind of flopping around because of the bad U-joints. So hopefully this helps whoever. There's probably 1,000 of these, but I'm telling you, when you watch enough of these videos, there's always something that you need that not every video has. You might have to watch 10 of them to get, you know, over that little hump, but that's a part of working on vehicles. You know, at home, that's part of doing stuff yourself. You kind of learn as you go, especially if you're young, like I once was in my former life. But hopefully this helps. Just hit the like button. Good luck.